All right, now we're going to look at the pathway of the respiratory system, right? So before we learn what the respiratory system is, what is the function of the respiratory system, if you remember? The function is breathing, right? Ventilation, gas exchange, right? So whenever gases get exchanged, so oxygen goes into the blood, CO2 comes out of the blood and it gets exhaled, right? What else does the immune system do? We also know that its main function is, I'm doing it right now, and I'm keep doing it, and I'm gonna keep going, sound, right? Generation of sound, that's really important for the respiratory system. And also plays another big role in immunity, right? Because remember, the respiratory system is an open cavity, right? So it's open to the atmosphere. And so immune system have a great time now that need to be constantly active because all these pathogens are constantly flowing through 24/7, right? And so when we talk about the respiratory system, let's talk about where it begins. So where does it begin? So it begins in the oral / nasal cavity, right? So mouth and nose, right? Comes in, what do you notice about, mouth? Like, what do you think it's composed of? So the mouth is highly composed of a lot of immune cells protecting. Remember, it's an open atmosphere. A lot of pathogens can come in, right? So a lot of mucous membrane that's present, allowing for the decrease in surface tension of the gases that are coming down, right? What else happens? A lot of immune cells, as we said. The nose. What do you think the function of the nose is? So nose, for those of you that are always trying to pluck your nose hairs out, right? The nose hairs actually play a good function, right? They filter out any kind of debris, right? So if you're thinking every single time you're plucking your nose hairs, right, and you start crying and sneezing, instead just leave them in there, right? Okay, I know there's an aesthetic stigma to it, right? Oh, nose hair, gross, right? But it plays a big role, right? It filters out debris and it prevents you from having any kind of dust particles coming into your nasal cavity, right? What else does the nasal cavity do? Nasal cavity, if you can remember, if you were athletes, younger and later, whatever, and you decide to, rather than being one of the people that worked out really decently, you want to be one of those hard workers. You actually believed you could be an athlete, right? You're like, I'm going to be a basketball player at 5'6". So every single morning, I would get up, and go to the basketball court in the cold weather, right? And what do you notice whenever you're breathing really hard with this phenomenon? It begins to hurt. Nasal cavity not only plays a big role in filtration, but it also humidifies the gases and also brings up the temperature, right? That's why whenever it was really cold, it would begin to hurt because the actual cold air you can feel it. So the nasal cavity plays a big role is actually increase the temperature, right? So if you ever do decide to try to become a pro athlete and work out in the morning, breathe with your nose. Try not to breathe with your mouth, right? Comes in, goes through this first structure here. We call this the pharynx. So pharynx, also known as the throat, right? So you can even call it the throat. Pharynx, also known as the throat, is a important structure that basically separates between the respiratory system and digestive system. There's 3 structures in the pharynx. You have the oral pharynx, you have the nasal pharynx, and then you have the laryngeal pharynx. Right? And so each region of the pharynx connects that specific region of the cavity. So the oral pharynx connects to the oral cavity. The nasal pharynx connects to the nasal cavity. The laryngeal pharynx connects to this next structure that we're going to be talking about, right? It's called the larynx. This is also called your voice box or glottis. So you have larynx, also called your glottis or voice box. And so I said the pharynx plays a big role in connecting the respiratory system and the digestive system. Above the larynx, there is this structure, this little flap called the epiglottis, right? So epi meaning above, glottis, voice box. And this flap right here that I have in green controls food from entering and exiting the digestive system, right? And so whenever you're breathing normally, right, and you get really excited, and you keep talking, and then you forget to swallow your saliva, and what happens? The saliva goes down the wrong pipe, okay? That's probably because the flap has not contracted correctly, and so rather than going through the digestive route through the esophagus, it comes down the larynx and eventually goes into this next structure called your trachea. So your trachea, another name for it, is the windpipes. So these are also called the windpipes. And so that saliva that you just swallowed that went into the wrong pipe is called the trachea. And so what does your body do? Your body begins to cough. Right? Why? Because you want to get all of this fluid out, right? Because it's blocking your airway. That's why you begin to cough, right? Trachea then, this C-shaped cartilage, right, that branches off to these next structures called the bronchi. So the bronchi is plural for bronchus, is where you have this branching taking place in your lungs, right? So it spreads out, right? And these branches now separate even more, divide more into these new structures called the bronchioles. And all the way at the end of each bronchiole, you have this final structure called the alveoli. Alveoli's main function is, this is the region where you have the actual gas exchange taking place. And gas exchange, what I mean by that, this is when CO2 and carbon dioxide passively move in and out of the bloodstream and enter the alveoli in order to be either expired outwards or returned to certain tissues in order to allow for the cellular respiration to take place.